Aloha Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui, and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Welcome to the program. In the earlier hour, we had been talking about the international arena, what's happening in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and other places. And in the second hour, I'd like to bring our attention to what's happening locally here in Hawaii, more specifically on the island of Oahu, and very specifically to the issue of rail. And the Hawaii Supreme Court in a 5-0 decision, so a unanimous decision, that the city did not proceed appropriately by trying to cut up the issue of rail into 4 different sections and then saying that we can go ahead and begin construction on the first side and then perhaps move on to the second side until we complete the construction without having done a full survey of the burials in section 1, 2, 3, and 4 before we begin our work on section 1. The Hawaii Supreme Court received an appeal from a circuit court decision, and I think Gary Chang was the judge in that circuit court decision. Ms. Kalei Kini, who is a cultural expert, especially dealing with the burials in the Kaka'ako area where the train is supposed to end up in, had filed a complaint, an attempt actually to enjoin the city from going ahead with this building of the rail because they had not done the complete study on the burials of especially Hawaiian graves, one would expect, in these areas, and what is to be done with any burials found, and whether or not new routes can be devised. Her point, represented by the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, 2 attorneys out of that corporation, her point was that you cannot begin the process and later on in the future complete your study about the burials. The law says complete it once and for all, complete the study for the full area, and only then can you proceed with the construction of the rail. In this case, the city said, no, that's not really what the law says. The law does provide us with the opportunity of separating it, and we'll study one area first and then begin the construction there, and then we will move in to continue with the construction, and then we'll study each area. Before we do construction, we'll study each of these areas. So the question then came up, well, what if you find burials directly in the path of the rail, where the rail is supposed to be coming into? And on one hand, they would either remove the burials, or the second alternative would be, well, they may be able to shift by 40 or 50 feet to circumvent where the burials are at. Now, engineering-wise, if you're going to deal with steel on steel rails and where you're going to place the footings for the elevated rails, you're not going to be able to simply bend the steel 40 or 50 feet away from where the next footing is going to be. It's engineeringly impractical to do that. And so it would cost you extremely high amounts of monies to do so, if you do so. And then by that time you may be led by finances, by the fact that, well, it's too late to cancel the project because you already committed for it, so we'll just pay additional funds and we'll remove the bones, or doing things like that. The Hawaii Supreme Court says, no, this is all wrong. The law says complete the study first. After completion of the study, then you can go and begin your construction. In this particular case, you have not done that. So what they did was they reversed the findings of the circuit court and instructed the judge to review the case again in line with the Supreme Court decision. As a result, it goes back to the circuit court in the meantime, and the Hart representative, what's his name, Gabrowski, have said, well, what we will do is we will complete the pouring of the concrete into these areas because we already dug the hole, so there's no real disturbance or any further disturbance to the ground there. We'll pour the concrete, but we will not do any more excavations, and so we'll complete that work, follow the Supreme Court's decision, and do the study. Naturally, they are going to try to do it as quickly as possible so that they can get back on track. Now, in the meantime, what happens to the contractors who have been instructed to start up, to mobilize your teams, and they are going to be saying, well, who's going to pay us for this down time? It was the city who told us to start it up, told us to get going. We have mobilized. It's costing us money every day. Previously, they claimed against the city $15 million for the delays that they already went through, and the city appears to have agreed that they will be paying them $15 million for that delay. This delay is going to cost quite a sum of money, it appears to me, which is, as far as I know, not included in the anticipated over budget or within the budget that they had anticipated. So it's going to be additional costs, and they don't know what they're going to run into after the studies have been done, or how long it will take for the studies to be done. Now, naturally, they're going to be pushing the Oahu Burial Council, which is an agency that has a particular position within this process, to determine whether or not they will approve or not approve of the archaeological findings or studies or recommendations that may come out. The Oahu Burial Council has already opposed the building of the rails until the study is complete. And so you will have some kickback there. Now, Oahu Burial Council is part of the state historic, what is that, historic places, I don't know the specific name, but part of the state historic preservation process, which is all under the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So the Department of Land and Natural Resources has signed without objection for the process to move ahead. So has this SHIPD, this state historic council. They have signed on saying just move ahead, but they have had some kickback from the Oahu Burial Council. Now, Miss Kalei Kini, the plaintiff in this particular action, I think she had been a member, or she still may be a member, of the Burial Council, and having taken the action has stopped the rail process from moving ahead. It's very curious, and I would like to see what is the response by the good mayor, Peter Carlisle, especially in view of his prior statements in on television in a debate, along with Kirk Caldwell, who both pointed out to Ben Cayetano in one of those debates, hey Ben, you cannot stop rail anymore. It's gone too far ahead. There's no way you're going to be able to stop rail. And they might say, well, it's not Ben who stopped it, or that it's not stopped, it's merely diverged into other areas. But it's a signal that it can be stopped. How a mayor can effectively stop it. Suppose as mayor, he says, well, the position we will take before the lawsuits that is now going on to stop the rail is that we will change our legal position and say that the complaints are correct. We concede to it, and the court will then order that the rail be stopped. So there's many things that a mayor can do to, in essence, stop the rail. Or he can refuse to continue with the allocation of funds, I guess. I don't know if that can be done because the city council may have already allocated the funds directly to this, or was it the BART or HART organization, and try to make it semi-autonomous. But from the mayor's position, there are a lot of things that can be affected to make that the organization essentially ineffective and not operational any longer. So if you would like to call and share an opinion, an observation about what has happened with regards to this whole matter, our telephone number is 524-1080, and the telephone lines are open. Give me a call to share your opinions. Now, some people have said, and I read a comment in the recent editorial page of the Star Advertiser, that don't fool yourself, because just as much as there has been many stops and goes with regards to H3, the same situation can come about. So there's no saying that rail has been stopped, because there had been legal cases, court interventions. H3 was finally built after many years, and that's true. But I think one cannot only look at H3 and use that why can't I say it correctly? Use that as an example of what will happen to rail, because not having to stretch back that far to H3, one only needs to stretch back to the Lingle administration and another event in which they tried to circumvent the environmental laws. And of course, that is the deal with the super ferry. And the super ferry lost because bureaucrats and politicians failed to follow the laws that they took an oath to follow. They simply failed to meet the environmental impact laws that they were required. They tried to rush it through, they were stopped, they tried to rush it through, stopped again. So finally, the developer or the operator of the super ferry threw up his arms and said, it's costing us too much, the state is not cooperating, and they pulled out. So now you do not have super ferry. Well, I suggest that the rail could follow that pattern just as well as others are suggesting that it could follow the pattern of the H3 freeway finally being built. Okay, your calls are welcome. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. Give me a call. We'll put you on the radio and see what you have to say about these matters. And as I review the issue of the rail, I think we should take our hats off to the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation for its tenacity in sticking to it. And although they faced a lot of opposition in the city and in the state, and there may be political repercussions for their stopping rail, and it may affect their funding or whatever it is, but they follow through with their commitment to represent the voices of Hawaiians, and in this case it was that Hawaiian voice that was effective in getting this decision to be reached. Is there something to say about all 5 of the justices of the Hawaii Supreme Court signed on to this decision? And how can it be? Normally, if there's a different way of seeing the law, especially when you have so many attorneys on one side and on the other side, and the same issues are still being heard in the federal court, that there would be some fuzziness. In this case, with all 5 justices signing on, agreeing to this point, it appears to be quite clear that if the law says, do your studies first, do your studies first. What was the city administration trying to pull? Is there something behind what Ben Cayetano is warning, that the issue is far deeper than just rail? It's the issue of power in Hawaii. And should it be handled or possessed by a clique of folks, one being the labor unions, the second being First Hawaiian Bank, and other cliques of businesses and individuals who have attained more and more power and are able to step on people and to suggest that their positions should not be, or to suggest that there should be no objection to the direction that they want to go. Okay, telephone number 524-1080. And we had been talking about the decision recently reached yesterday morning by the Hawaii Supreme Court, in which all 5 judges decided that the city needs to be stopped because they have not proceeded accordingly in regards to the process for a development to take place. The city, in this particular case, should have studied all of the burial sites and cleared or resolved all of those issues before beginning even in the first stage. And so it's a violation that the city has committed, and as a result must be stopped. I don't know if the decision later on in the circuit court, because the matter has been thrown to the circuit court or back to the circuit court, whether or not the circuit court itself needs to assess what the damages are or what the appropriate remedy should be. Do you dig out all of this concrete and you grass it over again as it had been? Do you turn back the properties that you had purchased in these areas back to the families or back to the property owners that you had purchased it from, or at least do you offer them an option to purchase now, or if the train, the rail does not go through? Many other questions that still remains, but for the time being, the work being done there should come to a stop. Of course, many people driving back and forth is saying, what, you mean all this inconveniences that we had to go through is all for naught because the city has jumped the gun? I don't know what inconveniences there really are, but it raises those possible questions. Okay, if you have a question or comment that you would like to share, our telephone number here is 524-1080. We'll put you on the radio and see what you have to say about some of these matters. Meanwhile, there had been a discussion that we have had on this radio station with regards to what was termed a litmus test of how do we test whether or not a particular candidate for public office or a particular project, whether it should go through or not. How do we evaluate events that occur or propose to occur in Hawaii, and whether or not we should give support or not to those events? And do we have a commonality of mindset, a commonality of understanding, an agreed upon vision of where Hawaii should be going and what kind of changes should occur in Hawaii? And when I say do we, who are the we? Are we only people who are generally listeners to this program, or are we talking about maybe a broader we, people of the Aina, the Kama Ainas, the Kehioka Aina, or Kapoia Aloha Ika Aina, the people who love this land, who are the we who should join in on this conversation and on this common search for an understanding, or a common search for a vision of where Hawaii should be going, and how do we organize ourselves into sort of a more solid grouping, and how solid should that grouping be? Do we allow for variations on similar themes? And not all walking in lockstep with one another. One of our listeners had not only called, but had subsequently sent me a draft of a document that he had proposed, and he had made a proposal on the radio with regards to the litmus test. And what I would like to do is maybe just read portions of that letter, and then we'll take another break, and then come back and complete that discussion. And he's saying that he's writing a paper, and he says the ideas, these build on ideas from many sources related to self-determination of indigenous people, the meaning of deep culture, and the need to vision a future society that is grounded in Native Hawaiian values and principles. This paper that he's writing, it emphasizes the right and responsibility of people in Hawaii to come together to discuss and arrive at agreement on a number of key points that underlie a collective dream for our future society. These points also represent a litmus test by which the people of Hawaii can assess the degree to which candidates for elective offices are committed to join in a collective effort to foster transformative social, political, economic changes in our society. He continues, the points outlined below represent a shift in our thinking about how elections can be implemented in Hawaii. This shift represents moving beyond debate over reforms in laws, regulations, or other short-term alterations to societal directions, but to far broader and deeper declarations of raising our collective humanity to a higher level of peace, justice, and equity here in Hawaii, and to and for all our relations. Very interesting, very indigenous North American Indian phraseology there, and to all our relations, meaning not only the two-leggeds but the four-leggeds, and the trees, and the air, and the sky, as well as the waters, to all our relations. In short, this quest is derived from a collective effort to establish a broad consensus for a vision of Hawaii and to support candidates who exhibit the courage and commitment to be visionary in transforming foundational beliefs of Hawaii's future. Participate in the restructuring of our systems to carry out such visions, and to discuss specific reformational policies to carry out these changes. I think not only to look at candidates and measure candidates, but perhaps beginning of the organizing of a movement, of an arm, to go to the legislature with very specific ideas about the direction of where legislation should be taking us. Looking at this tripartite approach of first visioning a different Hawaii, or the Hawaii that we want, and not simply accepting that whatever you come in with your money or your transnational corporations and say, I want to bring this about, we just go along with it, looking at only the short term, more jobs, and more jobs. But instead, taking a look at where do we want Hawaii to go into our future? How do we bridge from where we're at now into that future, and being able to walk across the bridge to bring about that vision into reality, and then going into the legislature, into the neighborhood boards, into business organizations, as well as looking at candidates for public office, and use this platform or this paper or this litmus test as a up as a foundation for our constructing of this bridge and for our opportunity to activate people in this direction. Is there enough of that going on? Is there at all anything going on? Is it really happening in the Democratic Party, in the Republican Party, or other political movements or groups in Hawaii? Or is it possible to bridge not only from our present time into the future, but to bridge among organizations who may have different principles, but we have certain commonalities about what are the values that should erupt from Hawaiian concepts and be a way of looking forward into our futures?
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii, Kupa ama hope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka pata. Mane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, Koku ana honoa o Pilani, Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, Pa'apu me ke oni o ka kuhi hewa. Aolea e kau I ka pulima, Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi, Po'ohui ai nā ku ai hewa, I ka pono sivila a